Good morning. My name is Joel McKeon. I'm an instructor based out of the Southeast Regional Office in Charlotte, North Carolina. Sitting right next to me here is Bruce Harold, a product manager at Esri on the desktop team, responsible for geocoding. Bruce and I would both like to welcome you to today's live training seminar, where we're going to talk about geocoding in ArcGIS 10. What we're going to look at today, first of all, is just get a basic idea of what is geocoding. Once we're done with that, we'll take a look at methods and tools for geocoding. And then finally, we'll take a look at address locators and also rematching. The way that the seminar is set up, each topic is followed by a software demonstration. We'll then briefly review it, and then Bruce will fire up the question and answer session. Please send in your questions anytime during the presentation. The more questions you send in, the better. It gives Bruce more material to work with. So now, we're going to go ahead and start off. So we'll talk about what exactly is this thing called geocoding. And to establish this, we'll first start off by talking about how the different ways we can describe location. Following that, we'll take a look at how geocoding bridges this gap and how the address locator is the tool that's used to do this. We'll then take a look at where you can find address locators to wrap it all up. So first of all, location. What is this thing called location? How do we figure out where we're at? Well, you and I, we're human beings. We tend to understand fairly well if somebody gives us a description of a location in the form of, let's say, an address. For instance, the one we have here in Paris, France. Also, you may be familiar with Loch Ness in Scotland. If you're familiar with the area, it wouldn't be that hard if somebody said, why don't you meet me on the south side of Loch Ness? You'd know exactly where they're talking about. Further, if you're wanting to find a location in the United States, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest in Washington, D.C., this might ring a bell. These are all descriptions of locations that you and I as human beings understand. The difficulty is the computer sees these locations slightly differently. This is the way the computer sees all three of these locations. Coordinate pairs, latitude and longitude. If you go to these latitude and longitude coordinates using your computer, it'll show you where they're at. The difficulty is, how do we link those two together? How do we go from one to the other? We do that using geocoding. And we can geocode in a couple of different directions. We have the capability to perform forward geocoding, where we start off with a description of a location, for instance, an address, or possibly even, like we were talking about earlier, Loch Ness. We then move forward such that the computer will return to us a dot on the map. It will place the dot there and give us the latitude and longitude because it now knows where this dot has been placed at. But now in ArcGIS 10, we've also introduced the capability to much easier perform reverse geocoding. This is where we can go from the latitude and longitude, that description that the computer understands, to one that you and I understand a little bit better, which can be the physical address or the description of the location. The tool that performs this for us is this thing called an address locator. The address locator is the translator that gets from the description that we understand to the latitude and longitude, the coordinate pair that the computer understands. This is the go-between. The address locator is what makes geocoding work. Now, there's a number of different places you can get your hands on address locators. First of all, there's a number of default locators available to you when you install the software. You'll have the North America, U.S. Streets, Europe, and World Places services. Now, looking at these, the North American service is going to be what's referred to as a composite address locator service, whereas the U.S. Streets just merely goes to the street ranges. Then you also have the capability to geocode in Europe, but also the World Places, which functions much more like a gazetteer. In essence, if we were wanting to look up Loch Ness, we would use the World Places locator. All four of those require that your computer is connected to the internet, because they are using ArcGIS online services to perform this geocoding. Now, the last address locator that is available to you by default when you install the software is the MGRS, or Military Grid Reference System Locator. This allows you to get MGRS coordinates, which also can work if you're needing U.S. National Grid coordinates to be able to do land navigation. And this one, again, does not require an internet connection to be able to access it. Now, this list of the default locators is not set in stone. You can go ahead and customize this list by customizing the default locators.xml file located in the Program Files directory. If you don't want to change the default locator list for everybody on the computer that you use, or you don't have administrative rights such that you can't change a file in that location, you can also change it in your user profile, which is located underneath the second path. Now, this path that we're showing right here, this is actually the path from a Windows 7 machine, but it would be fairly similar if you were also using a Windows XP machine. Now, if you need the capability to geocode locally and that you don't have access to the internet, or you don't want to use the internet for geocoding, you do have the capability to use Esri data and maps, which provides a geocoding, routing, and cartographic solution. The only downside of this is the data is not extremely current. This is about 5 years old, as a general rule. If you need something a little bit more current, you can subscribe and purchase Street Map Premium. Street Map Premium gives you access to another, just like Esri Data and Maps, a geocoding, routing, and cartographic solution that allows you to perform these tasks on a much more current data. Finally, if you want to go ahead and build your own and you have access to quality reference data, you can do this as well. You can use either parcel data, or if you have point data for the center for rooftops, or if you have your own street data, you can go ahead and build your own address locators. We'll briefly go over this process later in the seminar in one of the demonstrations. So now what we're going to do is take a look at and introduce geocoding within ArcMap. And the first thing we're going to do is, Bruce and I would like to introduce the geocoding toolbar at the top of the screen here that is new at ArcGIS 10. This toolbar has been added to greatly streamline the process of interactive geocoding within ArcMap. Notice that we have the capability to set our address locators, and we can choose which one we want to use. Further, we have the capability to manage locators from the same dialog. Now, to add a locator, quite possibly the easiest way to do it is simply to go over to Catalog in the window, find the address locator you want to use. For instance, if I want to add California points, I could go ahead and just simply drag that and drop it into the map document. Notice that a couple of things happen. First of all, our address locator is added to the map, and it is also selected in our drop-down from our geocoding toolbar. Now, in this case, we're going to go ahead and use a California composite locator that's already been in the map. So we're going to go in and manage our address locators so that we can remove the California points and pull that out so we don't have that confusing what we're doing. So now we're just left with the California composite, and we can even go ahead and make that our active locator if we want to. So now we can go ahead and close this. So now what we're going to do is investigate a little bit of forward geocoding. Bruce and I are sitting right now in a building at 881 West Redlands Boulevard in Redlands, California, with a zip code of 92373. If we go ahead and I'm going to press enter right now, notice how it flashes the building where we're at. Now additionally, we can right click on this. We could again tell it that we want to flash it again. It'll show us where we're at, but we can also have another option, which is even to go ahead and add a call out. So now we have a call out showing where we're at and even where the address is at. So that gives us the capability to perform forward geocoding. But we also have the capability to perform reverse geocoding from this toolbar. And to do this, we're going to move to another bookmark, up in Forest Falls. And if you're familiar with the area in and around Redlands, this is a very scenic area to go hike and run. And this is one of the places I like to go after work. So to be able to find the location we're going to go to, I got lucky. I got a rental car that has a GPS navigation in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the address so that I can put it into the navigation system so it'll tell me how to get here. And the trailhead, from experience, I know it's just right on this street right here. So what I'm going to do is make sure that my California Composite address locator is active, and I'm going to go over and use the Address Inspector tool to perform my reverse geocoding. So then I'm going to move down and specify, I know the trailhead's right along this road, and I'm going to click on it, and it tells me that I need to navigate to 41611 Alder Drive in Forest Falls. And if I want to make my life a little easier, if you look in the lower left-hand corner of the dialog, you notice that it gives us some key shortcuts. K to copy the text, P to add point, L to add label point, or even O allows us to add that call out. So now we've added this call out that shows us the address that I need to drive to so that I can go for a run after work today. Now, in addition to this, what we would like to look at before we finish this first demonstration is the capability not only to move to a description of a location that we're fairly familiar with, such as addresses, but also the capability we have to use this for MGRS coordinates. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to go to my final bookmark, which is OB Joyful Creek. If you're familiar with this area, this is located just outside of Crested Butte, Colorado. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit closer here so that we can see the area we're looking at. Notice the label right here. This, in fact, is OB Joyful Creek. Now, OB Joyful Creek, you can notice, is fairly steep. This is a fairly popular creek for kayakers. And right in the area around where it says Joyful, there's some fairly large waterfalls. Let's make the assumption that somebody is injured here and we need to send our search and rescue personnel in to rescue them. To be able to do this, we need to give the rescue personnel the U.S. National Grid coordinates, which we can find using the MGRS locator. So what we can do is we can go up and switch our locator to MGRS, and then we can go up and say we'd like to use our address inspector to go down, and right in this area where it's fairly steep, we can then get the MGRS coordinates. Now we could just simply write them down, or we can also, just like before, add the call out by pressing the O key to show the MGRS coordinates at this location that we could then give to our rescue personnel so they could go find our friend and get him out of there. So what we've looked at is the capability to use the geocoding toolbar to do both forward and reverse geocoding, and also how to manage your address locators from within ArcMap. So in this, again, we took a look at location, described what geocoding is, talked about how address locators fit into geocoding, and then briefly looked at where you can find a number of address locators. So now what we're going to do is turn it over to Bruce, and he's going to answer a few of the questions that you've been sending in.
Thank you, Joel. We've got lots of questions coming in. Firstly, Sharon from St. Catharines asks, is StreetMap Premium for the US only, or is Canada included? Well, Sharon, StreetMap Premium includes all the geocoding, routing, and cartographic data for the entire US, Canada, Mexico, and Europe. So Canada is certainly included. Kurt from Shelley asks, does address location come with all levels of licenses? Kurt, yes, it does. ArcView, ArcEditor, and ArcInfo desktop licenses all have exactly the same geocoding functionality. The only limitation you'll experience with ArcView is that you can't store an address locator in an SDE technology workspace. Rachel from Miles City asks, where can I store locators? Well, Rachel, you just heard that subject to the limitation of ArcView and SDE workspaces, and a geocoding locator can be stored in any valid ArcGIS workspace. That is a directory on any file system or in any geodatabase. Kelly from Washington, D.C. asks, how do I specify XY coordinates for unmatched addresses after geocoding? Well, Kelly, a little bit later in our demonstration, you'll see Joel use a dialog called the Rematch dialog, which lets you manually supply address corrections and or coordinates from the map for unmatched addresses. There's also another way. If your geocoded feature class has lost its connection to the locator used to make it, or it's been shipped to someone else who just doesn't have that locator, then you can use ordinary editing workflows to supply geometry. You want to add a tool called the Replace Geometry tool into your Edit toolbar, and then you can click on the map for selected rows with null geometry and populate the XY values. Jill from Dayton asks, how can you maximize the performance of address locators? Well, Jill, our testing for reasonably specified machines here on dual range national size locators in the US tends to return about 1.2 million geocodes per hour. We find that geocoding is CPU bound, so the kind of thing you want to avoid is having any slowness in accessing the index structure for the locator on your system. So keep your locators local to your network or your machine, preferably on your machine, and make sure you've got plenty of memory, and keep the runtime memory size parameter up at least 512 megabytes. And that, by the way, is a parameter you can see in the LAC file for a built locator or in the LAT file for a locator style. Keep it to 512 or more. If you've got a 64-bit operating system, you can go as high as 2 gigabytes for the runtime memory limit, and it will be used. Becca from Topeka asks, why do 931 locators show up in the geocoding toolbar, available locators pull down? Well, Becca, that's simply an artifact of our refresh cycle for the data at the back end. You heard Joel say that those locators are in fact services from ArcGIS Online. We refresh those at least semi-annually and expect to see 10 engine locators show up in your toolbar when we replace those services sometime in November. Good time for a couple more questions. Kim from New York is asking, how do you geocode fractional house numbers? For people unfamiliar with fractional house numbers, they occur where historically a property has been subdivided into, say, a front lot and a back lot, and the back lot gets the base house number plus a half. The house number address element in the new engine, Kim, understands alphanumeric house numbers in various styles. If your reference data has values which include fractional numbers, then those will be found and you can geocode against them. If you have an input fractional house number and the reference data doesn't have fractions in any of the reference values, then it'll use the main or base house number for the geocode. Time for one more. John from Denver, how do you geocode house units like apartments, or what modifications do you need to make to the locator style if necessary? Well, John, the out-of-the-box locator styles for the US look for apartment information at the end of an address, a given address, and at the moment they'll discard it because very little or very few sources of reference data include apartment information, so we didn't put that in the default style. But if you keep an eye on the Geocoding Resource Center gallery over the next month or so, you'll find a document there will turn up which will describe how to customize locators in ArcGIS 10. That will include an example of how to add apartment or subdwelling and unit information to an address style and what modifications you need to make to the reference data to make that all work. So that's coming, but not in the out-of-the-box style. So thanks, everybody. That's all I have time for right now. I'll hand back to Joel to carry on with the presentation.
Thanks, Bruce. So now let's go ahead and take a look at some of the geocoding methods and tools. So we have a couple of different ways that we can geocode, both interactively and batch. So we've already started to take a look at some of the interactive geocoding in ArcMap, but then we'll also take a look at some of the batch geoprocessing tools that we have available. So if you're going to perform interactive geocoding, you want to find just one or two addresses. The geocoding toolbar, as we've already said, is a very good place to start. This has been introduced at 10 to make interactive geocoding much easier to perform and streamline the process. You also, though, still have the Find tool that can access geocoding services as well. So you can go ahead and geocode using the Locations tab within the Find tool, which we'll take a look at in the demonstration here in a few minutes. Now with batch geocoding, you access this functionality through the geocoding toolbox. In particular, you'll be looking at a couple of tools: the geocode addresses for forward geocoding and the reverse geocode for reverse address location. So if you want to do forward geocoding, you'll use the geocode addresses tool, starting with a standalone table. You have just a large table full of addresses, and there can be other information associated with this in this table, but it needs to, at the very least, have the address location in there. Then using the geocode addresses tool, you can specify where you're going to save the feature class, and then you can make point features on your map, dots representing these addresses. And again, the address locator is the tool by which this is translated so that it knows how to get from one to the other. The geocode addresses tool just calls up the address locator to perform this function. Now, if you want to go the other direction, reverse geocoding, you'll use the reverse geocode tool, and you'll start out with a feature class full of a number of dots, locations, or features that you want to know where they're at. You can then use the reverse geocode tool to then have a new feature class created that has these locations, but also has the address and the city, state, and zip, the location description information that you and I understand. So now, what we're going to do is take a look at some more of these geocoding tools that we have available. So, starting off, what we're doing is we're going to take a look at some of the tools that we have available, and we're going to start off with the interactive geocoding tools. We've already taken a look at the geocode toolbar. However, what we're going to do now is take a step back and look at the find tool. And it came up just slightly out of the area that is being encoded, so let me bring the find tool down so you can see it. Now in the find tool, notice what we're going to do this time is we're going to look at the geocode service that's available from ArcGIS Online for Europe. And what we're going to do is we're going to find an address located in Switzerland. So we're going to go ahead and find this, and notice how it tells us that it's geocoded this at a number of different levels, the first one being at the street level, which we'll go ahead and take a look at. Now notice we have a context menu available such that we can tell it we'd like to zoom to this location so we can see where this is at. So now I'm going to move the find tool slightly out of the way, and we can see where this location is at. And in fact, I've already added the callout for it, but we can still go ahead and even right-click and say we'd like to flash this location so it'll show us where it's at. So that way you can see we've used an online service to find a location on the other side of the planet. So now we've looked at the interactive geocoding options. I'm going to go ahead and then close the Find dialog. And we're going to switch gears a little bit, and now we're going to look at the batch geocoding capability that we have available. So we're going to look into ArcToolbox to find this within the Geocoding Tools toolbox. So first we're going to focus on forward geocoding using the Geocode Addresses tool. But before we do that, we're going to investigate some of our source data that we have. Within our table of contents, we have a table in this map called the Addresses 50 table. If we go ahead and open up this table, let's see here, let's bring it up to where we can see it. The Addresses 50 table, having a little bit of trouble there. The Addresses 50 table has a number of addresses in it that are located in and around California. So what we're going to do is use the Geocode Addresses tool to go ahead and grab our addresses table. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use a locator that we have available that Bruce was nice enough to build for us, which is our California address locator. So our California composite locator. So what it's doing now is it's going through and looking at the table, and we have just a few columns in that table. Just simply the description of the location, the address, the city, the state, and the zip. And we even have zip 4 in there. Notice how it matched these up based on the information that was set up in the address locator. Now all we have to do is specify where this is going to be saved. Notice how it's putting it in our California geodatabase, which is where we'd like to put it. We're just going to simply name this our output just to make it a little easier. And then finally, we're going to say OK. One of the nice features about ArcGIS 10 is the capability now that we have background geoprocessing, which allows us to continue to interact with ArcMap while geoprocessing is going on. So now, once this geoprocessing tool kicks off, we're going to see a progress indicator down here at the bottom of our window. Notice how that pops up. While that's going on, I'm going to go ahead and minimize our toolbox. And further, I'm going to go to my bookmarks, and I'm going to go back to our geocode area, which is on the other side of the planet. We're back in California now. Again, our geocode addresses is still running. such that it's using the address locator to look up where our addresses are located at. Once this finishes, what has happened is if we look in Catalog and we look in our data folder and our California geodatabase, we notice that our output has been created, and further, our output has been added to our table of contents as a layer in our map document. And then further, if we go ahead and look at the attribute table of our layer, and we see that a number of fields have been added that tells us things like which locator was used, its match status, its match score, and then even the address at which it was matched at. In addition to this, it's preserved some of the original fields that were in the table, which includes the name of the business that we were going to try to find using the address location. So, what we've accomplished here is we've done forward geocoding. We've gone from the description of the location in the address field to points on the map. But this isn't the only way we can go. We can reverse geocode as well. So to do this, we're going to switch our data frames. We're going to activate our other data frame, and we're going to go halfway around the world all the way to France. And in Paris, we have a number of points available that we might want to go visit if we were going to France on vacation. Now, if we go ahead and open up this attribute table for our France points, there's one problem. We have the latitude and longitude, which might be useful if we have a GPS locator, but being that we're human beings, many times it's a lot easier to have an address that we can then go to. So what we're going to do is we are going to use the GP tool to go ahead and reverse geocode these points so we can get the descriptions of the locations in the form of addresses. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and open up our reverse geocoding tool, and from our table of contents, we're going to then be able to pull our France points. The locator we're going to use, we have a France streets address locator that Bruce is nice enough to build for us. We're going to go ahead and add that. And then once that's done, we'll go ahead and check the location where it's going to be saved at. And in this case, rather than saving it in the geodatabase, we'll just go ahead and save this as a standalone feature class, a shapefile in our default folder. So we'll go ahead and go up one level, go into our geocoding folder, and we'll go ahead and save this as our, and once I learn how to type, France, our France Addies. So we're going ahead and saving that as well. So now what we're going to do is let that get entered, and then once it gives us lets us go, we're going to say OK. Again, what this is going to do is this is going to be performed in the background. It's going to do this reverse geocoding as a background geoprocessing service that allows us to continue to work within our ArcMap document. So what it's doing right now is it's plotting these locations, comparing them to the street data, and interpolating their position. And then once it's done that, it's going to return a new feature class with all of these points that has the address location inside of the attribute table. So if we take a look in Catalog, once it finishes, we'll give it a second here, as it's thinking and going through and finding where our different locations are at that we're going to go, matching them up. Once it's finished, again, it's going to do the same thing. It will create that new feature class for us, in this case a shapefile, and then notice how it's been added into our table of contents. On top of our blue dots, we now have the small green dots that represents our France addresses. So if I go ahead and turn those off, notice how we have our France addresses, and if we go ahead and look at the attribute table, there's more information. We still have the latitude and longitude information, but in addition to that, we have the street, the city, and the postal code, so that we now know where we want to go when we're walking down the street. We can then identify that description of the location that we can more easily understand. So now, what we've talked about is the capabilities we have to geocode both interactively and batch. Within ArcMap, we can interactively geocode using the geocoding toolbar, but also the Find tool. With batch geocoding, we have the capability to both geocode addresses for forward geocoding, but also to reverse geocode to go from the location to the description of that location. So now what we're going to do is turn it back over to Bruce, and he's going to answer a few more of your questions.
Thank you, Joel. Another Joel from Madison is asking, are address locators part of the base ArcGIS install, or do you need some aftermarket data? Well, Joel, the served or ArcGIS online locators and the built-in locators like MGRS are part of every install. Also in the Data and Maps DVD, which is shipped with our software, there is a geocoding reference data and I think built locators which you can use, and everybody gets those. So you don't need to go out and find aftermarket data or go to any vendors for geocoding data. Barbara from Dover in Delaware is asking, can you create a custom geocoder that will automatically match those locations that didn't match to an exact point to a more general location like a zip centroid? Well, yes, Barbara, this is called a composite locator. A composite locator is just a stack or sequence of simple locators which are accessed one after the other by the geocoding engine to find hopefully the most refined location and then to a more general location. These are searched in sequence. There's a new geoprocessing tool at ArcGIS 10 for creating a composite locator. It used to be a wizard which people found a little awkward to drive, but that's the approach anyway. Create yourself a composite locator with a high resolution locator at the beginning and successively lower resolution locators afterwards. Lance from Franklin is asking, is the current engine much different from geocoding in 9.3? Well, Lance, the workflows are very similar unless you're going to talk about customizing locators, but the basic differences are we've built a new engine with higher match rates without an increase in false positives. We now support Unicode, so that's international languages that don't use ASCII characters. We support single line input like a search engine does. And we have tolerance for missing address components without any score penalty. So a number of benefits there with the new engine. Jennifer from Vienna asks, is there a way to find out what Esri distributors around the world may offer for geocoders? Well, Jennifer, Esri ourselves, corporate Esri, will be productizing international locators built with reference data from, I guess, global data vendors. But since Esri distributors operate as their own independent businesses, they may well be doing their own work in this area. So the easiest thing to do is to just ask the distributors of which you're interested in. You'll find links to distributors' websites and contact details on the Esri corporate page, esri.com. Just go look for Contact Us. Paul from Marshfield asks, where can I find documentation for taking a table of street addresses and adding a geocode to link with census data? Well, the workflow to do with ordinary geocoding, Paul, is well documented in the online help or the desktop help. Just search for geocoding and you'll get to either the geocoding guidebook or the geocoding tool descriptions. With respect to linking to census data, that will be down to the data you have available from the U.S. Census Bureau, assuming you're in the U.S. You may need to pre-process your reference data to add links back to the census feature classes and use an option called add additional output field when you create a locator. But I just thought of another option for you. Our Address Coder product is a nice little canned application which does provide links back to census data, and the same is true for our business analyst product. So look at both our core geocoding technology and Address Coder and business analyst products for what you're trying to do. Stephanie from Suitland asks, does ArcEngine include the geocoding tool? Well, not the geoprocessing tool, Stephanie, but the underlying geocoding engine is core technology for ArcGIS. So ArcEngine does include geocoding capability. Satish from San Jose asks, is the reverse geocoding available in ArcGIS 931? Well, Satish, it's available through the ArcGIS server APIs, but not as a batch tool in geoprocessing in 931. It is available as an interactive address inspector like you saw Joel doing up at Forest Falls. So yes and no, not as a geoprocessing tool for batch work, yes for ArcGIS server, and yes for interactively. Lisa from San Diego asks, does the address locator include historical street name data? Well, Lisa, there's a function that you can use to make use of historical street name data. The base styles support alias street name tables. So if you have a table which will link back to your reference data base street name, which provide historical or alternate street names. You can support alternate names that way. Time for maybe two more. Daniel from Houston asks, does Esri Street Map Advanced come with verified address locations for US and Canada? And the keyword there, advanced, Daniel, yes, I just looked on our site. The address points are included with Street Map Premium Advanced, but ordinary Street Map Premium uses address ranges. And I'll just try and do one more just to round it off. And let me see. Natalie from Sacramento asks, is the CA composite you used a custom locator available online? That's just one we made with a subset of reference data for California, and we gave it an arbitrary name, Natalie. You're quite free to make a subset of reference data from the DVD and Maps resource there and make your own limited geography locator. We're not productizing subsets of locators ourselves because we ship nationwide ones, but that's the way to approach that. So that's all I have time for. I'll hand back to Joel.
Thanks, Bruce. So let's go ahead and take a look at our last section. What we're going to do is we're going to take a little closer look at address locators and also the rematching dialog. So when we're looking at this, what we're going to investigate is we're going to take a high-level look at address locator principles. We're just describing what they are and what we need to create them. And as part of that, obviously, we're going to look at the process of address locator creation, covering it briefly in the discussion, and then also we're going to do a demonstration of how to create these. And then finally, we're just going to introduce a slight difference in the rematching dialog box depending on what type of address locator you're using, whether it's a 9x versus a 10 locator. Now, the idea behind an address locator is that it uses some sort of reference data to be able to know where to plot the street location at. When you're providing a description of a location, the address locator compares it to reference data to know where to place the data at, the point at that you're requesting. So in this case, if we were looking at, let's say, 200, or let's say 210 G Avenue, since over on the left side of our screen, we're looking at the 200 block of G Avenue and we're looking at 210, the computer is going to do a little interpolation and it's going to say, we're going to be about 10% down G Avenue. So it'll go about 10% down and it'll drop your dot there. However, if you have more accurate data, for instance, the precise locations of specific addresses, you can use those to create address locators as well. So for instance, in this graphic right here, we have some pretty precise data. We have the points representing the house locations, rooftop data, and we could very precisely locate 228 Highland Avenue. We could place that dot in the precise location where it's at. Now, creating an address locator to reference a single type of data is referred to as a simple address locator. We can have the simple address locators looking at a range of data where it interpolates the point like we were just talking about, such that we have the range of addresses that are covered by street segments, and the dot is interpolated along that street. But we can also make a simple address locator to only reference specific locations or specific features. For instance, in this case, we have a number of different point locations representing the addresses specifically on Highland Avenue. To create these simple address locators, we need to have a couple of things available to us. We first of all need to choose the style when we're creating our address locator. But then we also need to have some reference data available. We're always going to have a primary table. This is going to be the features representing the exact locations of addresses or street level data that gives us ranges of addresses such that we can interpolate the position of our addresses on. In addition to our primary table, we can also include an alias table. This is handy in case, for instance, you might have an address that could be 3325 Highway 51, or the same street is referred to as Pineville Matthews Road. So in that way, you would know by using an alias table that either way you would specify that address, it would still get a match, no matter whether you specified Highway 51 or whether you specified Pineville Matthews Road. The computer then has an alias table to reference to know to get your address matched for you. In addition to your alias table and your primary table, you can include an alternate name table. Your alternate name table allows you to be able to specify commonly known locations. For instance, if we were wanting to go down to the county courthouse might be at 1 Main Street. Somebody standing in front of it may just simply enter, I want to find the county courthouse. The alternate name table would then know to reference the county courthouse is located at 1 Main Street. Then we hand that to the address locator, and the address locator can then plot that point on the map for you. Now finally, when we're creating this, we also need to specify where the address locator is going to be saved. This is the output location. As Bruce was discussing earlier, with an ArcGIS license, you can only place these in file-based locations. And further, as a best practice, this is generally recommended, to save your address locator in a file-based workspace. This can either be a file geodatabase or a directory. Either way, this is the way the address locators are designed to run, is from a file-based workspace. Now, one of the advantages that you have with address locators is the ability to pull them together in composite address locators, such that you can go from your highest accuracy locator down to your lowest accuracy locator, but still have a fairly high chance of getting a match. So in this way, if we were to try to find, let's say 250 G Avenue, if we told it to first go to our simple address locator that represents our points, it's not going to find a match. But then it takes a step back down and it looks at our street level address locator and it discovers that, hey, I can find a match here. So then what it does is it goes 50% down G Avenue and places the dot there. However, if the next address were 228 Highland Avenue, it would just go to the dot representing the rooftop right there at 228 Highland, and boom, it would jump right on that, place the match, and move on. So that way, with the composite address locator, you can pull together different address locators to increase your accuracy, but also your chance of getting a match. And the nice thing about the composite address locators at 10 is you can mix 9x and 10 locators, such that if our street level locator was 9x and our rooftop locator in this example was 10, we could pull both of those together in one single composite address locator and it would work just fine. So now with address rematching, if you're familiar with address rematching and you've been doing this in version 9x, you're not going to have much difficulty with this. It's going to look fairly familiar to you. However, there is one small change to be aware of. If you're using a 9x locator in 10, you're still going to have the standardized address showing up in these two locations, underneath your candidate details and your standardized address in the lower left corner of your rematching dialog. Once you start using a 10 locator, though, notice how it changes slightly. You don't have the dual column in your candidate details, and the standardized address in the lower left corner of your rematch dialog is no longer present. So this is just something to be aware of. And the reason why this is the address locator is no longer creating a standardized address. So now, finally, we're going to go ahead and then take a look at a final software demonstration. And to do this, I'm going to switch over to my other data frame. And if we look at this area, we notice that this is very similar to the slide we were just looking at, with the exception that we have some street level data sitting underneath it. Now looking at this, it's pretty obvious. Our dots representing our rooftops are fairly accurate. They're sitting right on top of the two different buildings at 200 and 228 Highland Avenue. And if we look at the attribute table for these locations, let's go ahead and use our identify tool to take a look at the 228 location. We can see that we know where this is at based on attributes in our attribute table. We have Highland Avenue. We know that it's number 228. It's in National City, California at 91950. So this is a fairly easy way that we can go through and point our address locator at it so that it can index all of these points. Similarly, if we look at our street level data, it looks slightly different, but not altogether different. We still have G Avenue in California for our left and our right side of the street, with our zip codes for the left and the right side of the street. But now we have our starting and ending address ranges for the left and the right side of the street, so that then the address locator knows that there's a range, and we need to interpolate between these along the segment of the line. So to create this address locator, what we're going to do is we go into ArcCatalog to be able to build this. And what we're going to do is we are going to place this just in the root of our folder, and we're going to say we want to create a new address locator. Just like Bruce was talking about earlier, the address locator creation and the composite address locator have now been split apart, with the address locator option, which you choose if you want to build a simple address locator, which is what we're going to do right now. So now what we're going to do is first of all choose our style of address locator. Now when we bring up this dialog, you'll probably notice that this has changed a little bit. If you've been creating address locators in the past, you'll probably remember there's almost 30 choices available here. Now we've dropped that down to 8. So it's much easier to choose the correct address locator style when you're creating your address locator. So now what we're going to do is choose the dual ranges, since we have numbers on both sides of the street, and we're going to go ahead and say OK. We've chosen our style. Now what we need to do is specify our reference data. In this case, we're going to use our streets. So we're going to make our streets address locator. And then we need to check the rest of our properties. With our field mapping, we just need to clean up a little bit of our field mapping where the left and the right city in place go down to the left and the right side of the street. And then we also will leave the default location. It's going to put it in our 91950 geodatabase. That works great for us. And we can go ahead and say OK. Again, while this is working in the background, what we're going to do in the interest of time is just switch to our other data frame so we can look at we can investigate the rematching dialog using an address locator we've already built. So actually it finished that up, so it's thinking a second, and it's going to add this locator in. And let's see. What we're going to do though is we're going to go into our 91950. Notice here's our new address locator. But we're going to use one that was built to even do composite address location using both rooftop data as well as our street level data. But in this case, what we're going to do is another batch geocode. Because if we look at our data in our table of contents, we have a table that we've included in here with addresses for national city. We want to go ahead and find these. And if we go ahead and open up this table, and in fact it's not showing us to us, it has a number of addresses in there that we'd like to find the location of. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to go into our toolbox and we're going to try to geocode those addresses. So what we're going to do is specify that that input table for our national city addresses is going to be geocoded using our composite locator for 91950 so that we can have a higher level accuracy by using both point level data as well as street level data. So now we're going to specify our output feature classes in the 91950 geodatabase. That works fine for us. So now we're going to finally say OK. Again, we have the advantage that this is going to run in the background. So our address locator is going through, it's plotting all of our addresses, it's getting a match score, and it's going to create that output feature class. And when it's done, it will add it as a layer into our map document. Again, the nice thing is this is going on as background geoprocessing, so we can still interact with the map if we want to. Now, once finished, notice how this again comes up. If we look at this, it's been added to our table of contents, and with that selected, we have the capability to go up to our geocoding toolbar and say that we want to review or rematch our addresses. When this dialog comes up, it's a little bit larger than the encoding area, but we can pan back and forth to show it to you. This is an ArcGIS 10 locator, so you'll notice that the standardized address is not down here in the bottom of the dialog. So now, what we can do is I'd also like to call your attention to the upper right corner where we have 2 unmatched addresses. We need to go back and fix those. So the way that we can do that is in the dialog, just like before. If you're used to this, all we have to do is specify we want to only see the unmatched addresses. When we look at that, we have a couple of different addresses, And we noticed that our Plaza Boulevard East didn't match. We could check to make sure, in fact, to see that somebody possibly typed this in incorrectly, that may have needed to be East Plaza Boulevard, which in fact it did. We have a high probability of match now. So we can then go ahead and say we want to match that one. We've placed it. And with our other address, it's the same type of thing. Somebody just accidentally put the east at the end of the address instead of in front of the street name. Notice how we get a high-level score with that one as well. So now what we've done is using the Rematch dialog, we've been able to go through and match some of the addresses that wouldn't otherwise be placed. Notice our score now is 0% unmatched. We have 100% matched at 76, so we're looking pretty good. So now we've placed all our addresses using the Rematch dialog. So in this section, we just looked at the basic principles of address locators, how we go about creating those, but then also how we use the Rematch dialog box to go through and place all of our addresses. So now what I'm going to do is open it up, hand it over to Bruce again, and he's going to answer a few more questions.
Thank you, Joel. First, Jim from Doral asks, can there be multiple aliases for a primary street? Yes, there can, Jim. There can be any number of aliases for a primary street. Patty from Louisville asks, how do you geocode if you want to locate a corner, say corner of 1st and Main Street? Well, Patty, so long as your locator is built with street center lines, then the locator will recognize intersection-style addresses where there's a street name and an intersection connector and another street name, and intersection connectors are things like the words and or at, or characters like ampersand or vertical pipe characters and so forth. So that'll work just nicely. Michael from Kenosha asks, how does a batch job output multiple matches? Batch geocoding outputs only a single best match, Michael, but it does have the ability to detect tied matches. Tied matches are situations where two candidate reference points achieve the same address score, but they'll have to have separate geometry before they're considered ties. Like coincident house numbers at the same location won't be considered ties. So you won't get multiple matches, but you can detect ties. Geodata from Missoula asks, which address locator comes with Business Analyst Desktop? Well, Geodata, I just looked up on our website, and I happened to see that it's TeleAtlas rooftop data that comes with Business Analyst Desktop. Virginia from Carroll Stream asks, so if I'm in Paris with my laptop, can I use the reverse geocoding tool to actually find addresses? Yes, you certainly can, Virginia, subject to you being either having a French locator on your laptop or you having an internet connection and using our online service. Ralph from Vienna asks, can you geocode by parcel ID? Well, two answers for this one, Ralph. If you want to have a single feature geocode that just accepts your PIN numbers, yes, you can build a polygon centroid locator built from your parcel PINs or ID numbers. Alternately, you might pre-process rooftop address points to append a parcel ID to each of the rooftops and output that parcel ID as an additional output field from geocoding, and then you can add a parcel ID to street addresses as inputs. Owen from Concord asks, is there a way to determine the accuracy of a geocoded point? Well, Owen, the geometric precision of geocodes is identical to that of the reference data we use to build the locator, so that's one way to think about accuracy. If you're concerned about whether or not the addresses are interpolated or built from address points, you'd have to know how your locator was built to answer that question. A good way to check on this is to use interactive address inspection to see if the visual hint returns points where you can see it interpolating along a center line. Then you'll have an idea. Let me see. Phil from Greenville asks, do we have the ability to specify if the geocoding process should be run in foreground or background? Yes, Phil, all batch geocoding is a geoprocessing task, and you can choose whether to run in foreground or background, just like any other geoprocessing function. Max from Toronto asks, how are custom address locators created? Well, Max, you can customize address locators in quite a range of ways, very simply by adjusting parameters, runtime parameters, by editing the LOC file for the locator. You can change the values that are recognized for input fields and so forth, but a very comprehensive document on how to customize address locators is in the works here at Esri. We expect to have it published in the Geocoding Resource Center next month after Service Pack 1 is released, and that'll give you full details on how to really customize your locators. Time for a couple more. Chris from Bend asks, when reverse geocoding, do all types of coordinates work? For example, decimal degrees and so forth, or is one format needed? Chris, I expect you're asking about reference data. Reference data may be in datum coordinates, that's like decimal degrees, or in any projected units, it won't matter. Reverse geocoding will work fine. Now, the distance that reverse geocoding depends on is a measure in either degrees or linear units, but really measurements in degrees are kind of suboptimal because they are different on the ground distances depending on where you are on the Earth. So we kind of recommend that you use projected data for reverse geocoding. And a similar question came in from Joe in Oxnard. Last one, Jack from Ambler asks, can a railroad line be geocoded? He'd like to add line name and milepost information. Well, Jack, you can treat your railroad segments as points with a GP tool and reverse geocode those and add line name and milepost from a suitable locator. But I suspect that what you might want to look at is linear referencing technology. If you have a database of mileposts with line name on them and milepost distances, you can add measures with links back to that data from your railroad lines. It's not geocoding technology per se, but it's related linear referencing technology. So that's all I got time for right now. I'll hand it back to Joel to wrap up.
Thank you, Bruce. Before we go, we'd like to just point you toward a little bit more information if you want to dig up some more stuff. First of all, is we have a couple of training courses available. Included in the ArcGIS Desktop Tools and Functionality class is a chapter on geocoding, where we discuss and go over, and you will do yourself, putting together an address locator, using it to geocode, and then doing a little bit of rematching, both interactively and automatically. If you want to focus a little more on just geocoding and want to work independently, we also have the web course, Geocoding with ArcGIS Desktop, available as well. Both of these you can find more information on the training website, which is just training.esri.com. Now, a few other resources that are available out there. The one that Bruce has been referring to a number of times now that he maintains, which is the Geocoding Resource Center, you can navigate to by first going to resources.arcgis.com. But when you go to the Resource Center at resources.arcgis.com, if you look down in the center column underneath Functions, third from the bottom is the Geocoding link. If you click on the Geocoding link, that will take you to the Geocoding Resources Center. You can find a number of resources here to learn more about geocoding, including any new additions, which many times are added in the gallery. So in here, these are a number of things you can find. For instance, if you want to find the address errors Python script tool that Bruce has put up just a few days ago. All of these are available in here. Additionally, I think Bruce mentioned earlier, if you still want to access the 931 locator styles while using 10, this is where you find this as well. In addition to the Resource Center, there's also the ArcGIS Ideas, which you can find at ideas.arcgis.com. This is a great place to provide feedback to Esri about what you do or don't like about the software and improvements that you would like to see. This can include everything from geocoding all the way up to anything else that you discover about the software. Now finally, your comments help us improve our seminars. Please take a moment to complete our survey by just clicking on the Give Us Feedback link to complete the survey. Bruce and I both hope you enjoyed today's seminar, and on behalf of Esri, I would like to thank you for attending.